In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where crescent moons crowned towers and loyalty bowed to blood, a blade moved in silence. He was no prince, no soldier, no nobleman. Just a shadow in a hood, who dared to do the unthinkable. He pierced the heart of an empire, by piercing the heart of its ruler. But assassins do not crave thrones, unless they've been taught how to rule. This is the story of a man who killed a sultan, and became something far more dangerous. Not a king, a legend born in blood, silence, and betrayal. The air above Constantinople trembled with the scent of salt and steel. From the minarets of Hagia Sophia to the bustling docks along the Bosphorus, the great city groaned under the weight of ambition. It was the spring of 1532, and within the opulent walls of Topkapi Palace, Sultan Murad III ruled with the confidence of a lion surrounded by chained jackals. But far from the Sultan's gaze, in the blackened alleys of Üsküdar, a different power stirred, cloaked in silence, fueled by vengeance. His name was Selim. To the world, he was just another shadow, a mercenary with no past, no kin, no allegiance. But Selim remembered everything. The fire, the screams, the execution of his father at dawn, accused falsely of treason by Sultan Murad's viziers. Selim had been 12, hidden beneath the floorboards of their humble home, watching his father's blood soak the earth. That image had burned into his soul like a brand. Now 29, his body was honed like a blade, tempered by hardship and silence. His eyes, grey like stormy waters, saw not the city but a chessboard, each man a pawn, each noble a piece waiting to be tipped. He was not alone. The Ashraf Brotherhood had whispered of him for years, an order of assassins cast out by the Sultan's great purge. Selim had tracked them from Cairo to Aleppo, then through the Tigris Valley until he found their ruined monastery near Erzurum. There, beneath a winter moon, he pledged himself, not to their dogmas, but to their vengeance. Now, after a decade of planning, the dagger neared the throat. Selim stood in a tea-house by the docks, a thin veil of steam curling around his fingers as he clutched a porcelain cup. He wore the clothes of a spice merchant, loose robes, a crimson sash, a ring on his thumb bearing the insignia of the Levantine Traders' Guild. To any watching eye, he was harmless, invisible. Across from him sat Fadi. Once a Janissary commander, now his inside man. He leaned in, voice low. "The Sultan leaves for Edirne in 2 days," Fadi muttered. 4 guards. Fewer than usual. He trusts the route. Selim nodded. "Then we strike en route." Fadi hesitated. "If we fail." "There is no failure," Selim interrupted, his tone firm but not harsh. "Either the serpent dies or I do." A gust of sea wind swept through the open shutters, fluttering the lantern flame above them. For a moment, the shadow of Selim's dagger flashed across the table, a slender curve of silver. It was not enough to kill a sultan. Selim would become one. He had infiltrated Murad's court under a second identity, Nasir al-Din, a scholar from Andalusia, invited by the Sultan's curious daughter to catalogue ancient maps. Nasir was gentle, soft-spoken, and carried a Quran wherever he walked. No one suspected the mild-mannered cartographer was training palace slaves in dagger fighting under moonlight or poisoning the coffee of guards just enough to keep them groggy. The route to Edirne was a day's ride along the Maritsa River. Selim had already arranged for a small landslide to block the first leg. As Fadi made final preparations, Selim returned to the palace. In the Sultan's private library, Princess Layla was reading an atlas by candlelight, her delicate fingers tracing the coasts of the Aegean. "Nasir," she said, glancing up, her eyes the color of wild saffron. "I still cannot believe the Greeks once believed the earth ended here." Selim smiled. "When power blinds men, they see only the edge of their own world." She laughed softly. "You speak like a poet." He bowed. "A poet who hopes to map your empire, Highness." "Will you come with us to Edirne?" she asked, her voice playful but curious. Selim's mind flickered with calculation. "If you wish it," She nodded, closing the atlas. I do. And just like that, he was invited into the heart of the caravan. The dagger would strike sooner than planned, and the empire would bleed. Night draped itself over Constantinople like a velvet shroud. Within Topkapi's inner courtyard, silence ruled, a rare stillness in a palace that never truly slept. But in the harem wing, just past the mosaic archway, Selim, Nasir to all those around him, moved quietly, following Layla's maid through a corridor lined with silk-draped walls and flickering oil lamps. She awaits you in the eastern garden, the maid said, bowing before vanishing into the shadows. Selim stepped past the lattice doors, into the cool embrace of the garden. The moonlight draped the fig trees in silver, and jasmine curled its scent around every breath. Layla stood near a fountain carved in the shape of a lion, a shawl over her shoulders, her dark braid hanging down the front of her robe. You walk like a man without weight, she said without turning. I've carried it so long, Selim replied, stepping closer. I no longer feel it. She smiled faintly. You speak in riddles, Nasir. He didn't respond. Instead, he stared at the reflection of the moon in the fountain's still water. For a moment neither spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. My father will not rule much longer. He is growing paranoid. The court whispers behind his back. He speaks to shadows. Selim turned to face her. What do the shadows say? That death follows him. Selim's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper. Her words were closer to prophecy than suspicion. He had spent years feeding those whispers, stoking the embers of paranoia in the court. Slowly, methodically, he had bent the minds of viziers, eunuchs, even kitchen staff, one poisoned mind at a time. The Sultan was a lion, yes. But even lions go mad when surrounded by ghosts. Layla looked up at him. Nasir, tell me something. Truly. Who are you? Selim blinked, the air suddenly colder. A man looking for peace. She searched his eyes. And will you find it with blood? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows, bowing slightly. Forgive me, Highness. I must prepare for the journey. He left her with the wind and the rustling leaves. 2 days later, the royal procession rode out from the palace gates beneath banners of crimson and gold. The Sultan's palanquin was surrounded by elite Sipahi cavalry, while Layla and a small retinue of concubines rode in covered carriages behind. Nasir rode a dark bay horse near the front of the caravan, clad in travel robes, scrolls tucked in leather cases across his chest. The air was warm, the sun high. By midday, they reached the first pass along the river, where Selim's plan began to unfold. A fallen tree blocked the path, as expected. A landslide of soil and rock had crumbled the ledge above. The guards fanned out to clear it, muttering curses under their breath. Selim dismounted and stretched, walking to the side of the convoy where Fadi waited with 4 disguised men posing as escort guards. One nodded subtly. Everything was in place. Then a scream. Selim turned sharply. One of the Sultan's guards had fallen to the ground, convulsing, his lips already purple. Poison. Selim hadn't ordered it. Which meant someone else was moving too. A second scream echoed, then a third. Horses neighed wildly as panic took hold. Layla's carriage jolted to a halt. The Sultan's palanquin wobbled as guards rushed forward. Selim's hand moved to his belt, fingers closing over the hilt of his dagger. It was now or never. He ran toward the palanquin. Sultan Murad! He called in Nasir's voice, his face tight with concern. You must leave the carriage. It is not safe. The door burst open, and the Sultan emerged, furious, hand resting on a jewel-encrusted scimitar. His face was lean, weathered, but his eyes still held fire. What treachery is this? Selim stepped forward quickly. Your guards are compromised this way. Before the Sultan could reply, an arrow sliced the air and embedded in the ground inches from his feet. Selim didn't wait. He lunged forward, wrapped his arm around the Sultan's shoulder, and dragged him behind the carriage for cover. To everyone watching, it looked like an act of heroism. But in truth, Selim was isolating his prey. Another arrow whistled past. Screams erupted as Fadi and the other saboteurs drew blades and began their false defense. Selim drew his dagger and whispered, "For my father!" Then he plunged the blade deep into the Sultan's side. Murad gasped. Blood bubbled on his lips. His hand clutched at Selim's robe, trembling. "You! Nasir!" Selim pulled him closer, pressing his mouth near the Sultan's ear. "My name," he whispered, "is Selim ibn Harun." The Sultan's eyes widened, then dimmed. He collapsed. Selim looked up at the chaos, guards shouting, horses running, arrows still flying. He rose, blood on his hands, and bellowed, "The Sultan has been struck! Protect the princess!" In the storm of confusion, no one questioned his cries. No one saw the truth. And the throne of an empire had just been emptied. The death of Sultan Murad was as swift as it was silent. In the panic that followed, few noticed the precision with which Selim navigated the battlefield. His orders rang out like steel. "Secure the princess! Protect the caravan! Fall back and regroup at the second checkpoint!" The Sipahi responded with instinctive obedience, their training overriding any suspicion. In the fog of arrows and panic, Selim emerged as the voice of command, firm, calm, and decisive. By dusk, the caravan had relocated to a small fortified rest house along the Maritsa River. Layla was kept in guarded quarters, shaken but unharmed. The Sultan's body had been hastily wrapped and stored in a guarded chamber beneath the watchtower. Selim stood above it now, alone, watching as a single droplet of blood escaped from the cloth and trailed down the stone. He exhaled. It was done. But taking a crown was not the same as wearing it. Word of the Sultan's death spread like wildfire through the veins of the empire. By the time Selim returned to Constantinople, the court was already reeling. The viziers gathered in Topkapi's divan hall, murmuring about assassins, bandits, whispers of betrayal. Layla had returned ahead of the others, her face blank, her silence deeper than grief. Selim was no longer Nasir. Now, he introduced himself to the court as Selim ibn Harun al-Qazwini, a descendant of noble blood, a man who had risked his life to protect the royal family during the fatal attack. He presented his forged lineage documents, stamped with old Ottoman seals he had stolen years ago from a forgotten archive in Bursa. He even had letters, written by the late Sultan, testimonies of trust, allegedly delivered before the Edirne journey. The court was fractured. With no male heir of age, and Layla refusing to step into the role of sultana, the viziers squabbled over succession. Selim fed their fears. He met with them one by one, first in private, then in hushed gatherings. He promised stability, promised reforms, promised gold. But it was Layla who held the key. He found her one evening on the palace terrace, staring down at the city's sprawl, her face unreadable. "You're not a scholar," she said without turning. "You're not Andalusian. Your accent slips when you're angry." Selim approached slowly. "No, I'm not." She turned to him. Her eyes were glassy, red-rimmed. "My father trusted you, and he killed mine," Selim replied gently. "I was 12. I watched from the floorboards as they dragged him out. They said he plotted treason. He was loyal to the end. Layla didn't flinch. So you killed him." "I did what you never could," Selim said. "I cut off the head of a rotting empire." A long silence passed between them. Then she whispered, "You'll take the throne." He nodded. "With your help, they will not resist. If you stand beside me, I will not rule as a tyrant. I will give you real power. You will not be some veiled ornament behind a curtain. You will shape this empire." Layla's face flickered with something, anger, sorrow, perhaps even admiration. She stepped closer, her voice low. "And if I refuse?" Selim's jaw tensed. "Then I become the monster they fear me to be." They stared at one another beneath the starlight, two storms wrapped in silk and steel. Finally, she said, "Then let history call us both monsters." The coronation took place 10 days later, The courtyard overflowed with nobles, soldiers, and foreign envoys. The call to prayer echoed through the domes as the imperial crown was lowered onto Selim's head. His robes were dark red, chosen not for tradition, but for symbolism. He made no pretense of innocence. And by his side stood Layla, veiled in gold. The people cheered. The palace trembled. But in the alleys of the city, in the smoke-choked halls of taverns and the chambers of old warriors, others whispered a different name. They called him the Crescent Dagger, and they wondered how long the blade would remain clean. The reign of Sultan Selim I, Selim the Crescent Dagger, began not with a feast, but with fire. 3 nights after the coronation, a warehouse near the Golden Horn erupted in flames. The blaze devoured rows of merchant ships and charred several storehouses belonging to Persian and Venetian traders. Panic surged through the city. Rumors of sabotage swept through the bazaars and madrasas. Selim knew the fire had not been random. He stood at the waterfront before sunrise, staring into the smoldering ash. Fadi joined him, his face tense beneath his cloak. "Your enemies move quickly," Fadi said, his voice gruff. "The Janissary elite are restless. Some of them blame you for the Sultan's death, even if they don't say it aloud. They don't need to speak," Selim said. "Their silence is rebellion. Shall I send a message?" Fadi asked. Selim didn't answer immediately. Instead, he bent down and picked up a burnt piece of wood, running a thumb across its charred edge. "No," he finally said. "Not yet. Let them think themselves clever. Let them meet in secret. I want to know their names, Fadi. Every one of them." He tossed the wood into the ash and turned away. In the palace, Selim's first edict was swift and unexpected, a complete audit of the treasury. For years, gold had leaked from the empire's coffers like a bleeding wound, embezzled by corrupt viziers, squandered on foreign luxuries, gifted to sycophantic allies. Selim ordered all court accountants detained and interrogated. Several high-ranking officials were imprisoned. One was found hanging in his cell before sunrise, though whether by his own hand or someone else's, no one could say. Layla watched it all with a cautious eye. She sat across from Selim at a small marble table in the private garden one morning, sipping cinnamon tea. The roses around them had begun to bloom, but the air between them stayed cold. "You rule with fear," she said. "I rule with purpose," he replied. "If they feared Murad less, perhaps he'd still be alive." She tilted her head. "Do you believe your father would approve of what you've become?" Selim's jaw stiffened. "My father died a loyal man. I will not." There was a pause. "Do you still dream of that day?" she asked. Selim looked at her. His gray eyes were unreadable. "Every night." Layla didn't ask more. She already knew. A month into his reign, Selim began making appointments to key positions. But rather than relying on noble lineage or seniority, he promoted men from unexpected places: an Albanian former slave as Grand Admiral, a Syrian calligrapher as chief diplomat, a Jewish physician as his personal advisor. The court balked. Selim ignored them. "You are throwing away the traditions of 5 centuries," one old vizier protested in the divan hall. Selim met his gaze coldly. "Then perhaps they deserve to be thrown." At night, Selim wandered the palace walls alone, cloaked in black. He no longer slept in Murad's old chamber. Instead, he converted a small, forgotten tower room into his quarters: stone walls, one slit of a window, a single oil lamp. No luxury. No comfort. He needed none. It was from there he wrote letters, to Cairo, to Damascus, to Tunis and Baghdad. Carefully crafted missives promising trade, security, shared rule. But they were not offers. They were moves on a board only Selim saw in its entirety. But even the most calculated emperor cannot see every shadow. In the silence beneath the palace kitchens, a whisper bloomed. A name, Zafar. A blade once thought broken, now reforged in darkness. And it hunted Selim's blood. The first sign of Zafar's return came in the form of silence. A palace scribe, loyal to Selim and known for his fastidious journaling, failed to report for the morning record-keeping. His body was found an hour later, slumped over his desk, no wounds, no sign of struggle, save for the strange mark scorched into the wooden surface near his hand, a crescent bisected by a line. Salim stared at the symbol when Fadi showed it to him. "He was poisoned?" Salim asked, though the answer was obvious. Fadi nodded. "Not by anything known to our physicians. His blood thickened until his heart stopped. No smell. No taste. Instantaneous." Salim's eyes narrowed. "Zafar." Fadi clenched his fists. "But we buried him years ago. Perhaps not deep enough." Zafar had once been the most feared assassin of the Ashraf Brotherhood, Salim's mentor and executioner, the man who taught him to vanish in a crowd, to unhinge a man's life with the stroke of a quill or a whisper in the wrong ear. But Zafar had betrayed the Brotherhood, selling their secrets to Murad's spies. His punishment had been death, delivered by Salim himself in the snow-blind canyons near Erzurum. He had watched the man fall from a ledge, his body crashing down the rocks like a shattered idol. Salim moved through the palace like a blade unsheathed. His paranoia sharpened by instinct, he began changing guards every 12 hours. Food tasters were appointed, double rotations enforced, even his most trusted advisors watched with narrowed eyes. The court, already wary, began to whisper behind folding fans and velvet curtains. Layla noticed. "You're afraid," she said one evening, approaching him on the steps of the courtyard as the sun dipped into the Bosphorus. Salim didn't look at her. "I'm prepared." She stepped beside him, arms crossed over her embroidered robe. "There is a difference." Salim turned to her slowly. "You think I've lost control. I think the man I made an alliance with," she said softly, "is now looking over his shoulder more than ahead." He stared at her for a long moment. "Zafar lives." Layla blinked. "The traitor? He's hunting me." Layla's expression did not change, but something shifted in her posture, an almost imperceptible rigidity. "I will double the guards on the inner court," she said calmly, "and send riders to our informants in Bursa and Aleppo." Salim watched her. "You believe me, then?" "I've seen the kind of men you fear," she replied. "They don't stay dead." That night, the palace walls swelled with torchlight. Archers were stationed atop every tower. Halls echoed with the soft sound of slippered feet and drawn steel. And yet, when Salim returned to his tower room after midnight, the oil lamp inside was already lit. He stopped at the door, every muscle coiled. A voice spoke from the shadows. "You learned to walk without sound, Salim. But you never learned to stop breathing like a ruler." Salim stepped in. Zafar sat in the far corner of the room, cross-legged on the floor, dressed in black so dark it swallowed the lamplight. His beard was streaked with silver now, but his eyes, those sharp obsidian stones, had not changed. "How did you survive the fall?" Salim asked quietly. "I didn't," Zafar said. "The boy you pushed died. What rose in his place has no blood left to bleed." Salim didn't reach for a weapon. It would be useless. If Zafar had wanted him dead, he already would be. "What do you want?" Salim asked. Zafar smiled faintly. "To finish your training." Salim's brow furrowed. Zafar rose smoothly, like smoke. "You've taken a throne. But you're still no emperor." "I rule the empire," Salim said. "You occupy it," Zafar corrected. "But it does not fear you yet." Salim's voice dropped to a growl. "You killed one of my men." "I killed one of your weaknesses," Zafar replied, stepping closer. "You built this court like a weapon, but you filled its sheath with silk. You still mourn. You still hesitate. You still dream." Salim clenched his fists. "Then why come back?" "To offer you a choice," Zafar said, drawing a thin dagger from his sleeve and tossing it onto the stone between them. "Become the blade. Or be broken by it." Salim stared at the dagger. The empire had been taken. But to keep it, he might have to lose the last pieces of himself. Salim didn't touch the dagger. He let it lie between them, its polished steel glinting beneath the wavering flame. The silence pressed hard around them. Thick, suffocating, filled with the weight of 100 unspoken memories. "I've already made sacrifices," Selim said at last, his voice low. Zafar took a slow step forward, the embroidered hems of his black robe whispering across the stone. "Not enough," he said. "You still carry your father's shadow. You still believe in justice. But empires are not ruled by justice. They are ruled by fear." Selim's eyes flicked to the blade again, then back to the older man. "You came here to teach me that? I came to see whether you're worth killing," Zafar replied, and for the first time, Selim felt it, the faint tremor of danger in the air, like lightning before a storm. Zafar stepped closer still, now within arm's reach. His breath smelled faintly of clothes and death. "Choose," he whispered. "Break the Empire into something new, or die guarding the corpse of the old one." Selim looked him dead in the eyes. "I will not become you," Zafar smiled. "That is the first step to becoming me." With that, he turned and vanished into the shadows, no sound, no trace, as if the room itself had breathed him in and forgotten he ever existed. Selim stood there for a long time, alone with the dagger, and the weight of 1,000 choices pressing on his chest. The next morning, Selim issued 3 new orders. First, he announced the construction of a new intelligence office within the palace, separate from the Janissaries, separate from the court. An invisible force, operating without uniforms, without names, reporting only to the Sultan. Second, he ordered the immediate dismantling of the old Treasury Council and replaced it with a small group of hand-picked administrators, many of whom came from modest merchant backgrounds rather than noble families. The viziers howled, but Selim did not listen. And third, he summoned Layla to the Tower of the Two Moons, an ancient observatory, long abandoned by the scholars. She arrived draped in emerald silk, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "What is this place?" she asked. "Our future," Selim said simply. He gestured toward the high marble table in the center of the room, covered in maps, ledgers, scrolls, and drawings of architectural designs. Layla walked around the table slowly, her fingers brushing the edges. "You plan to rebuild the city. I plan to rebuild the empire," he said. "And I want you to shape it with me." Layla looked at him long and hard. "And if I refuse? Then I do it alone. And it will be darker." A moment of silence passed, then another. Finally Layla said, "Show me." Selim pulled aside a velvet cover, revealing a wide parchment map of the Ottoman domains, marked with circles, arrows, and shaded territories. "Every place marked in red is where corruption has hardened like stone," he said. "The courts are bought, the soldiers are unpaid, and the people live in the shadows of their rulers." "You intend to crush them?" she asked. "I intend to replace them with something leaner, quieter, smarter." He leaned over the map. A silent empire. Layla stared down at the inked cities, 1,000 heartbeats beating across parchment. "And the cost?" Selim looked at her. "Everything." In the weeks that followed, the transformation began. Viziers were found dismissed or vanished. Merchants once shunned by the court were elevated to positions of influence. A former Greek prisoner was made governor of a coastal province. Selim's eyes were everywhere, and his silence became more feared than Murad's fury ever had. The court tried to resist. Some whispered of rebellion. Others wrote letters to foreign consuls, begging for alliances. But one by one, those voices were quieted. The Janissaries remained silent, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Their commanders had been replaced quietly, their loyalties tested and divided. Selim had learned well, but he had not forgotten Zafar's words. Late one night, as the city slept under a soft drizzle of spring rain, Selim stood once more in his small tower room, the same dagger still untouched on the floor where Zafar had left it. He stared at it. Then, at last, he bent down and picked it up. His reflection in the blade was thinner now, colder. But it still belonged to him. For now. A storm swept over the Marmara Sea that night, slashing the shores with wind and rain. The domes and minarets of Constantinople shimmered with thunderlight, their silhouettes flashing like memories across the clouds. Selim stood on the balcony of the Imperial Observatory, dagger still in hand, watching the lightning split the sky. The blade felt strangely alive in his grip, light, balanced, ancient. It hummed with history. Zafar had not given him a weapon. He had given him a question. Behind him, the doors creaked open. Selim didn't turn. "You walk like a falcon today," he said. "I thought I walked like a shadow," Layla replied. He smiled faintly. "You've changed." "So have you," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it, an unease that hadn't been there weeks ago. "I spoke with the Venetian ambassador this morning," she said. "He's terrified of you." "He should be," Selim murmured. "Fear breeds respect. And we need respect." Layla stepped beside him, her hands folded beneath her sleeves. She looked out at the rain-soaked city below. "They think you're building a tyranny. I'm building a machine," Selim said. "One that cannot be broken by betrayal or weakened by bloodlines. But every machine breaks," she said. "Eventually." He turned toward her. "Not if the blade stays sharp." Layla looked down at the dagger in his hand. "That's Zafar's, isn't it?" Selim nodded. "He's still alive?" "Yes." "And you let him walk away?" Selim's voice was quiet. "He was never here to kill me." Layla's jaw tightened. "And what was he here for? To finish molding you? To push you further into the dark?" "He came to remind me what I could become if I forget what I'm doing this for." "And what are you doing this for, Selim?" He looked at her, really looked, for the first time in days. The hardness in his face eased, just slightly. "For the empire my father dreamed of, before Murad crushed him. For every silenced voice. Every stolen future. Every merchant who paid to be heard and was still ignored." He stepped closer to her, the rain soaking through the edges of his cloak. "But I can't do it without you." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "Then don't lose yourself in it. I won't follow a ghost." Selim reached into his robe and handed her a scroll, sealed with wax, marked not with the royal sigil but a simple crescent and line, the same symbol Zafar had left. "What is this?" "A list," he said. "Every name I've uncovered in the last 10 years. Every noble who bought a seat. Every warlord who bribed his way to power. Every rat who whispered falsehoods to Murad. You decide what happens to them." Layla broke the seal. And in that moment she understood. He was giving her power, not to appease her, not to distract her, but because he trusted her judgment more than his own. By the end of summer, the city had changed. The old bureaucrats were gone. The slave markets were shuttered. Grain prices were stabilized. For the first time in years, the people whispered with a mix of fear and hope. "The crescent dagger sees all," they said, "and he punishes fast." In Bursa, a governor was publicly hanged for cheating local artisans. In Damascus, a ring of corrupt tax collectors was executed by the very farmers they had robbed. In the palace, Selim moved like a ghost from meeting to meeting, his face rarely smiling, his words always measured. But Layla remained his anchor. She turned the observatory into a real center of governance, filling it with scholars, engineers, architects, and mathematicians. Together, they designed irrigation projects, trade routes, and even new coinage stamped not with Selim's face, but with a symbol of scales held in one hand, and a dagger in the other. Justice and judgment. The empire had a new face. But shadows never vanish entirely. One autumn morning, Selim received a letter with no sender, written in ink so fine it shimmered slightly under the sun. It read, "You are not the only one building a machine. In Cairo, in Tunis, and in the courts of Vienna, your enemies are assembling. If you want to rule the future, you must own the night. The blade is only sharp if it never sleeps." Selim read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully, slid it into a drawer beside the dagger, and turned toward the window. Beyond the horizon, wars were brewing, but for the first time, the Sultan of the Empire did not fear them. He was ready. The dagger had drawn its first blood, and it was hungry for more. Winter fell like a curtain over the empire. Snow dusted the rooftops of Constantinople, blanketing domes and towers in silence. The Bosphorus slowed to a black crawl, its surface dotted with ice. Traders wrapped their wares in heavy wool and braved the cold only when necessary. But within the palace walls, there was no such stillness. Selim had summoned his council, what remained of it, for a series of midnight sessions known only to a few as the Circle. They met not in the divan hall, but in the old cistern beneath the palace, a vast stone vault lined with forgotten columns and torchlight that danced over the ancient water. Fadi was there, standing just behind Selim's chair, sword drawn, not out of paranoia, but policy. Every man at the table had been chosen from the ashes of the Empire's old machine: merchants, former soldiers, renegade scholars, each owing loyalty not to bloodline or tradition, but to Selim's vision. A map was stretched across the table, weighed down with daggers. 3 cities were circled in crimson ink: Cairo, Tunis, Vienna. Selim leaned forward. "We've rooted out the rot in our walls," he said quietly. "Now the wolves circle." The merchant lord of Thessaloniki, a wiry man named Harun, cleared his throat. "There are whispers that Vienna is preparing another trade blockade through the Danube. If they tighten the ports in Wallachia, our flow of metal and salt will collapse." The former Janissary commander, Iskender, growled. "Then we send ships north. Break their blockade." "We don't have the fleet," Harun snapped. "Not yet." Selim raised a hand. Silence fell. He turned his gaze to a man seated at the far end, cloaked in a scholar's robe, face half-shadowed, quiet until now. Yusuf al-Rumi, a mathematician from Baghdad, and his most unpredictable advisor. "Yusuf?" Selim asked. The man leaned forward slowly. "War is a resource problem, not a morality one," he said. "If Vienna closes the Danube, they must pay dearly for the pressure. But not in blood yet. In fear. You must send not an army, but an idea." Selim considered him for a long moment. "What idea?" "An embassy," Yusuf said. "With gifts. With gold. And with one veiled warning, that Cairo is next." A murmur passed through the others. "Why Cairo?" Iskender asked. "It's far, fractured. What threat is it to us?" Selim turned to the map, his fingers tracing the Nile like a thread through cloth. "Because Cairo has what Constantinople no longer does," he said softly. "A free press." He tapped a point near the city's old districts. "A rogue printer has been publishing broadsheets against me, claiming I murdered Murad, claiming I poisoned the court, claiming I made an alliance with devils." Layla's voice echoed from the stairway. "You did." They turned as she descended into the cistern, her green robe dragging behind her like a river of silk. She met Selim's eyes. "But I still stand beside you," she said. Selim offered her a small nod, then turned back to the council. "We send no army to Cairo," he said. "We send a ghost." Within 2 weeks, a merchant galley sailed under false flags across the Aegean and slipped quietly into Alexandria's harbor. Among its passengers, spice traders, silk vendors, and one silent figure who never showed his face above deck. That figure's name was Nadir, Selim's first true ghost. Trained by Zafar, sharpened by Selim himself, and molded for one task only: silence. Cairo, despite its fractured rule, was a vibrant city. Its people talked fast, bargained hard, and trusted no one, traits born of too many rulers, too much invasion. It made infiltration easier. Nadir moved through its markets and alleys like smoke, never buying anything with the same coin twice. Within 4 days, he found the printer, Al-Muhtadi, once a court poet, now a political pamphleteer. His broadsheets flooded the mosques and cafes like wildfire, crude cartoons of Selim wielding daggers over children, burning books, torturing scholars. The headlines screamed with venom. Dagger Sultan, they called him. Nadir studied the man for 3 days. Al-Muhtadi kept no guards. Trusted everyone. Moved in a predictable pattern. Too predictable. On the 7th day, Al-Muhtadi died in his sleep. No signs of poison. No wounds. Just an old man, breathless in his bed. But beside him, his press had been broken. Its plates melted, its paper stash burned. A single sheet remained, pinned to the wall with a dagger, its edges scorched. It read, "The ink has dried. The silence begins." No name. No emblem. Only a thin crescent carved beneath the final line. In Constantinople, news of Al-Muhtadi's death reached the palace by hawk. Selim read the message silently, then burned it. He stared at the rising sun through the frost-streaked window of his observatory, and said nothing for a long time. Behind him, Layla entered and waited. "I never asked if you believed the things he wrote," Selim said. Layla answered without pause. "He was wrong." Selim turned slightly. "About what?" "He thought you ruled for yourself," she said. "But you never have." Selim stepped away from the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I wonder if I'll remember why I started," he said. "By the time this is over." Layla stepped to him, took his hand. "Then let me remember for you." He looked at her, eyes heavy not with grief, but the ache of endless movement, of a throne that gave no rest. And he knew the empire would move, like the blade. Cutting, yes, but also carving. Making something new. Or bleeding until there was nothing left. Spring bled slowly into the bones of the empire. The snows melted from the palace eaves, and the Bosphorus returned to its deep, restless rhythm. Birds returned to the gardens, and the air in Constantinople no longer stung the skin. But within Topkapi's walls, the atmosphere had grown heavier, not from winter's chill, but from a tightening coil of power and tension. Selim was everywhere now. He inspected the city's granaries without warning. He visited the shipyards at night. He walked the alleys of Galata cloaked in common garb, watching, listening. Every whisper mattered. Every hesitation was a ripple that betrayed deeper tides. And yet, in every reflection he passed, in polished steel, in clear water, in glass, he barely recognized himself. His face had grown leaner. His eyes colder. His voice more measured. Every word now carried the weight of 1,000 spies and soldiers. Even in solitude, he spoke as if someone listened. They always did. In the lower wing of the palace, Layla had transformed the observatory into something more than a command center. It had become a sanctuary of minds, a place where artists, mathematicians, engineers, and astronomers gathered to rebuild the empire not with armies, but with ideas. Selim would often visit at midnight. He entered once to find a young boy presenting a model of a water wheel that could irrigate farmland twice as fast. Another time, a Syrian woman described how heated aqueducts could prevent frost damage in northern provinces. These were not battle plans. But to Selim, they were victories. Still, the war drums never faded. One afternoon, a rider from the Balkans arrived with urgent news. Wallachia had aligned with Vienna. Selim stood in the grand hall, scroll clenched in one hand, the other resting on the pommel of his sword. Fadi stood beside him. "If they lock us out of Wallachia, our eastern trade dies. And Vienna will think us weak." Selim nodded. "Then it's time they remember our strength." He turned to Iskender. "I want 2,000 men on the Wallachian border within a week." Quietly. "I want the rumors to spread before the soldiers even arrive." Iskender bowed. "And the real objective?" Selim's voice dropped. "Fear. Not invasion. Let the nobles there see their future in flame, then offer them another path." The campaign was swift. Selim didn't fire a single shot. His men spread across the border, lit false beacons, sabotaged 2 minor trade roads, and left burned-out wagons in carefully chosen places. Then emissaries arrived with scrolls offering protection in exchange for allegiance. By the end of the month, for Wallachian lords had broken from Vienna and signed secret agreements with the Ottoman crown. The court celebrated. But Selim did not. That night, he found himself in the gardens with Layla, sitting beneath a blooming cherry tree, its petals floating like soft ashes in the breeze. "You win without blood," she said, plucking a flower from a low branch. "The old sultans would envy that." "It's not victory," Selim replied. "It's a pause. We delay the blade, not sheathe it." Layla studied him. "You still fear Zafar?" Selim hesitated. "He hasn't contacted me since Cairo. But he's watching. Waiting. You don't think he'll strike?" Selim looked at the dagger still tucked into his robe, the one Zafar had left for him. "I think he's waiting for me to become him," he said quietly. "And when I do, he'll either vanish or kneel." Layla placed her hand gently over his. "Then don't." He looked at her. She continued, "Don't become him. Become something new. Something they've never seen." Later that night, as the Empire slept beneath the stars, Selim wrote 3 letters. One to the Pasha of Tunis, offering alliance through trade rather than conquest. One to a Spanish exile in Fez, inviting him to Constantinople to share his knowledge of siege defenses. And one to a man whose name he never signed, only sealed with the mark of the crescent. "Zafar, I will not break. Not in your image. Not in anyone's. I will not rule through fear alone. I will not silence truth to sleep at night. But I will defend this empire, and I will not hesitate when the blade must fall. If you still wish to test me, then come. You'll find my back turned to no one." He sealed the scroll and passed it to a raven-eyed courier before dawn. "Let the shadows read it. Let the ghosts stir." Selim was done waiting. The letter disappeared into the web of informants and wandering couriers before the morning prayer call reached the domes of Hagia Sophia. Selim watched its departure from the rooftop above his chambers, his silhouette framed against the sky the color of spilled ash. The city began to stir below, the call to prayer unraveling over rooftops, echoing off the sea. The shadows would receive his message. Now, he would wait no more. By the time the sun crested the palace walls, he had already summoned the core of his intelligence council, the Eidolon, they called themselves now. Ghosts of rank and file, men and women without titles, only symbols, their faces known only to Selim and Fadi. They met not in chambers or halls, but in the catacombs, once burial crypts, now carved into a hub of whisper and steel. "I want everything," Selim told them. "Every whisper from Tunis. Every betrayal in Vienna. I want Cairo's new press rebuilt under our seal. And I want to know if Zafar has resurfaced anywhere. If he breathes, I want to taste it in the wind." The Eidolon bowed and vanished like mist. Selim did not go back to his chambers. He walked the lower quarters instead, where workers sharpened tools and fixed palace tiles cracked in winter. He passed scribes, cooks, guards, stable hands. No one expected to see him there. No one ever did. That was the point. He paused by a stable boy no older than 11, brushing down a mare. "What's her name?" Selim asked, voice low. The boy startled, blinked, then bowed clumsily. She doesn't have one, Bay." "Then name her," Selim said, kneeling. "You brush her, care for her, feed her. What do you call her in your head?" The boy hesitated. "Kara." "Why?" The boy looked down. "She was born in the dark." Selim smiled faintly. "Then Kara it is." He stood and placed a silver coin in the boy's hand. "If she dies from anything but old age, I'll ask you why." He left before the boy could stammer thanks. Selim knew better than anyone, kingdoms were not built on iron and silk, but on loyalty in forgotten corners. That evening, Layla entered his study unannounced, a scroll clutched in her hand. She dropped it onto his table. "News from Tunis," she said. Selim unrolled it. The Pasha's crest, the tone diplomatic, but the message unmistakable. "We accept your proposal for a trade alliance. But any interference in our succession or press will be met with force." Selim leaned back, thoughtful. They're wary. They're afraid, Layla said. But not enough. He tapped the edge of the scroll. Then we'll send a scholar. Someone to teach their scribes, not command them. Send Al-Rahim, the old historian. Layla blinked. You're sending a teacher? A sword speaks only once, Selim said. A book speaks for generations. 3 days passed before the shadows answered. Selim was alone in his tower quarters when he heard the knock, soft, rhythmic, for beats followed by silence. The old signal. His hand moved to the dagger instantly. The door creaked open on its own. But no one stood there. Only a single parchment lay on the floor, folded with the precision of a soldier folding a flag. Selim picked it up and opened it. There was no letter. Just a drawing. 2 eyes. One closed. One weeping blood. And beneath them, the symbol Zafar had used once before. A crescent cracked. Selim stared at it for a long time. The next day, he received word from the border provinces. His emissary to the Kurdish hill tribes had vanished. A fortress he had ordered built along the Armenian edge had been burned to the ground, its builders executed, their heads stacked like a warning. Zafar had answered. Not with poison, not with steel, but with spectacle. Selim stood at the edge of the Topkapi courtyard, robes heavy with fresh rain. Fadi approached with his usual grim face. He's in the east, Fadi said. We found the same mark carved into a ruined village gate near Van. No witnesses. No bodies. Selim said nothing for a long while. Then, he's baiting me. Yes. He wants me to stretch myself thin. Leave the palace vulnerable. Yes. Selim turned to Fadi. Then send me east. Fadi flinched. Sultan, send Layla in my place to the Caraman Council. Let her speak with the sheiks. I go east. With you. With 10 riders. No banners. No fanfare. Fadi swallowed hard. And if it's a trap? Selim's eyes narrowed, ice and iron. Then I spring it. Before sunrise, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire rode out of Constantinople without ceremony. 10 riders at his flank. No royal sigils. No royal guards. Only steel. And silence. And a dagger waiting to meet its twin. The road east was a quiet serpent. It wound through valleys and old Crusader ruins, under black rock cliffs and past shepherds who never looked long enough to see the men in their cloaks. The Sultan's small party moved like wolves. No campfires, no songs, only brief murmurs and shifting saddle leather in the night. Selim said little. He rode at the front, his hood drawn low, eyes scanning every bend in the road, every rustle of trees. His thoughts moved faster than the horses beneath him, through memories, through warnings, through old lessons Zafar had whispered in the dark when Selim had still been Nasir. Before the dagger. Before the crown. Your mind is your blade, Zafar had said. Your silence is your shield. But your memory is your weakness. Selim gritted his teeth as he remembered. Not today. Not anymore. On the 7th day, the riders crossed into the eastern provinces, where the empire thinned like old fabric and wild tribes ruled the hills beyond the reach of law. They passed a village half-burned, its homes blackened to the bones. No corpses. No blood. Just silence and a stench that made the horses shy away. Fadi rode up beside him. This is the 3rd like it, he said quietly. No signs of looting. No arrows. No survivors. Selim dismounted, walking among the ruins. Charcoal crumbled under his boots. He crouched beside a collapsed wall and picked something from the ash. A broken medallion. Marked with a symbol, a circle with a horizontal slash through it. Not Zafar's mark. Selim's brow furrowed. This isn't him. Fadi frowned. Then who? Selim rose. Copycats. Or something worse. That night, they made camp in a cave near the border of the Zagros hills. No fire. No sound. Only breath and shadow. Selim sat alone near the entrance, dagger across his knees. "Why are we here, Zafar?" he whispered. As if in answer, the wind outside changed direction, and someone entered the cave. No footsteps. No sound. Just a shape. A man. Cloaked in black, hood up. Face shadowed. Selim didn't move. "You're late," he said. The shape stopped 3 steps away. "I never left," Zafar said. He removed his hood. His face was older now. Paler. But his eyes burned with the same obsidian sharpness that once haunted Selim's boyhood dreams. They stared at each other in silence. Selim rose slowly, dagger still in hand. "Why did you burn the villages?" Zafar's voice was calm. "I didn't." Selim's grip tightened. "Don't lie." "I don't need to," Zafar said. "You trained them well, Selim. Too well. You made shadows, and now some of them no longer need a light to follow." Selim's blood chilled. "You mean the Eidolon?" "No," Zafar said. "I mean something new. Something you didn't birth, but they wear your crown. They burn in your name." He stepped closer. "They call themselves the Second Dagger." Selim's hand hovered near his belt. "That name doesn't exist in my council." "It does now," Zafar said. "Your silence birthed it. You made the Empire efficient, invisible, ruthless. But when you stopped looking into their eyes, they began looking into yours. And they saw something worse." Selim's voice was ice. "Where are they?" Zafar didn't answer. Selim stepped forward. "Where are they, Zafar?" Zafar looked at him calmly. "They're everywhere you're not." A gust of cold wind swept into the cave. Selim stared at him. "Why tell me this? You came to destroy me." "No," Zafar said. "I came to see what you'd become. And now I see it." "What do you see?" Selim asked. Zafar's answer came like a knife. "I see an emperor who finally understands why empires cannot be ruled by knives alone." Selim lowered his dagger. "You warned me I'd lose myself," he said. Zafar nodded. "And you did." Selim's gaze hardened. "Then help me take it back." For the first time, Zafar's expression shifted, an unreadable flicker across the battlefield of his face. "Even ghosts get tired, Selim." Selim held out the dagger between them. "Then help me become something else." Zafar looked at the blade. Then took it. Not as a weapon, but as an oath. By dawn, the cave was empty. The Sultan rode west again. With him, 10 riders and 1 shadow who no longer walked behind, but beside him. The war was no longer against the old empire. It was against the empire his own silence had created. And for the first time in years, Selim was no longer hunting ghosts. He was hunting himself. The return to Constantinople was a blur of hooves and storm clouds. Selim rode without pause, his cloak soaked through, his beard dusted with ash from the burned-out villages he left behind. The roads were worse now, emptier, quiet in a way that felt watched. Traitors gave him and his riders wide berth. Even the wind seemed to whisper. He didn't speak much during the ride, but Zafar did. The old assassin had changed. He no longer spoke in riddles or epigrams. His words were fewer, heavier, weighed by guilt not yet confessed. "They don't just kill, Selim," Zafar said one evening by the riverside, as they camped beneath a tree splitting from age. "They erase." Selim stared into the fireless dark. "Erase what?" "Records. People. Whole families." Zafar's eyes glinted like glass. "They've moved beyond you. Beyond empire. They worship only silence now." Selim's hand gripped the reins tighter. He remembered the scrolls Layla had once laid before him, blueprints, new cities, universities. A future. And now, the second dagger had taken root in the very soil meant to grow that future. He had built an empire of ghosts. And some had learned to haunt without him. When Selim entered the city gates under the cloak of night, he did not announce his return. He and Zafar took a hidden route through the lower streets of Ayup. bypassing the court and the royal guards. Fadi split off with half the riders, heading to the observatory. Selim needed Layla informed, now, not later. He reached the old armory behind the Grand Bazaar by midnight. It was there the first fracture appeared. A secret outpost. One of his Eidolon stations. But it was empty. The trapdoor beneath the wine crates had been torn open. Inside, the floors were scorched. Blood stained the walls, dark, dry, weeks old. A knife, familiar in design, lay on the floor. One of the Eidolon. Executed. Zafar crouched beside the body and lifted the dagger. They're clearing out your routes, he muttered. They're not waiting for your orders anymore. Selim stood still. Then I'll cut them off at the head. By morning, Selim had summoned only 3 people, Layla, Fadi, and Yusuf al-Rumi. They met in the sealed vault beneath the observatory. No scribes. No guards. No court. Only trust. Layla entered last, her face pale with worry. I've already seen the missing names, she said. 3 Eidolon stations abandoned. 2 scholars in the observatory library dead. One of them was Rahim. Selim's expression didn't shift, but Layla saw the flicker in his eyes. He was on his way to Tunis, she added quietly. Yusuf unrolled a scroll covered in concentric circles and strange numerals. These are coordinates, he said. We trace signal fires from the Eastern Front. They're communicating in patterns. Not ours. Not the old Ashraf codes either. Then whose? Selim asked. Yusuf looked at him. Theirs. Entirely theirs. Fadi stepped forward, voice low. We need to expose them. Publicly. Denounce them. Set the city against them. Selim shook his head. No. They want that. Fear gives them power. We don't give them fire to feed on. Layla leaned against the table, arms crossed. Then what do we do? Selim looked up. We unmake them. The next phase moved quickly, almost invisibly. Selim drafted a dozen secret decrees, written in cipher, signed only with the crescent. He released no public orders, no court edicts. But one by one, mid-level officials began to vanish from posts. Guard captains resigned suddenly. Grain shipments changed hands. Trusted advisors of the late Murad, some retired, some dead, had their family holdings quietly seized. And then came the trap. Selim publicly announced the creation of a new branch of the Eidolon, the Lighthouse, tasked with exposing corruption within his own rule. He knew it would enrage the second dagger. He wanted it to. They took the bait. 2 weeks later, a library master was assassinated in the open courtyard of the palace. Arrows from nowhere. A symbol carved into the stone beside his body. Zafar saw it and smiled coldly. There. Now you've got their attention. Selim's reply was simple. Good. That night, he and Zafar walked through the palace gardens. Torches flickered in the hedges. Fountains ran silently. The moon rode high above them like a polished coin. They'll come for me soon, Selim said. Zafar nodded. They think you're weak now. Surrounded by advisors, architects, poets. Selim looked toward the observatory tower, its windows glowing faintly. They're wrong, he said. I am the dagger. Zafar turned toward him. No, he said quietly. You're not. Selim stared at him. Zafar's voice didn't waver. You're the hand holding it. For the first time in months, Selim smiled. Not with triumph. Not with cruelty. But with clarity. Then let's end this, he said. The night answered with silence. But somewhere in the dark, steel began to move. The next day, the air over Constantinople felt like a drawn bowstring. Selim stood alone at the upper terrace of the Tower of Justice, looking down over his empire. The city bustled as usual, merchants bartering in the alleys, smoke curling from bakers' ovens, the faint clang of coppersmiths ringing from the bazaar. Life continued as if nothing was wrong. But Selim saw the truth behind it all. There were shadows where there should be light. Silence where there should be song. Eyes watching from rooftops that hadn't been assigned guards. The second dagger had made its move. Now Selim would make his. At dusk, he issued only one order. Empty the inner court. No servants. No guards. No courtiers. The announcement caused confusion. The inner court, heart of the palace, sacred to the Sultan's privacy, was never left unguarded. But Selim's word was final. By midnight it was empty. And in the dead of night, when the stars had hidden behind thin clouds and the city's heartbeat had slowed to a whisper, the trap was sprung. They came in silence. 7 of them. Cloaked. Unmarked. Faces hidden. Moving like shades between the marble colonnades. They entered the court from 3 angles: North Gate, Southern Stair, and the Fountain Terrace. Each knew their role. 2 would flank. 2 would disable Selim's decoys. 1 would cut the lines to the bell tower. And the last 2, twins known only as the Echoes, would handle the Sultan. They moved like gods of vengeance. Until one of them stepped into the reflecting pool. And the water swallowed him whole. Not water. A pit. Spiked. Camouflaged with mirrored glass and shallow liquid. The others froze. Too late. The shadows that had waited beneath the garden's hedges moved at once, unfolding from the stone like living statues. Not palace guards. Not Eidolon. Ghosts. Ashraf trained. Selim's first shadows. The ones who had never stopped answering his silence. The courtyard erupted in a flurry of steel and smoke. No shouts. No warnings. Just clean, merciless strikes. Blade meeting blade. Arrows whispering past pillars. Blood soaking into marble faster than it could pool. Selim watched from the second balcony, expression carved from ice. Zafar stood beside him, arms folded. "They're good," Zafar murmured. "They were yours," Selim said. Zafar smiled faintly. "No. You made them your own." Below, the Echoes were the last to fall. They moved in tandem, spinning, slicing, switching positions like reflections of one another. But they weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting ghosts of the same training. And ghosts know how to kill their own. When it was done, the marble floor of the court was stained black with 8 bodies. Selim descended the stairs in silence. He stopped beside the last to fall, one of the twins. Her mask had cracked, revealing part of her face. Young. No older than 20. Eyes open, glassy, staring past him into nothing. He crouched. Pinned to her chest was a strip of parchment, written in a jagged, angry hand. "We were born from your silence. You made us necessary. Now see what your justice costs." Selim said nothing. He stood. Zafar walked to his side. "This was a vanguard. I know. There will be more. I want them to come." The city awoke to silence and rumors. No public executions. No proclamations. Just the palace gates closed until noon, and whispers of shadows vanishing in the dark. A chill gripped the nobility. Merchants waited 2 extra hours to open shop. Even the imams paused longer between verses. Fear had returned to the heart of the empire. But Selim did not revel in it. He summoned Layla. When she arrived, he stood alone in the marble garden, facing the tree she once called the last breath of spring. She looked at him carefully. "It's done." He nodded. "The blade has struck its mirror." She stepped forward. "What now?" Selim's voice was calm, but cold. "Now we make sure nothing like them rises again." Layla's brow tightened. "You're not going to hunt them all?" "No," he said. "I'm going to outlive them. By making the empire so strong, so fair, that no one will ever want to pick up their blade again." Layla studied him, then quietly asked, "And if they do?" Selim looked toward the eastern horizon. "Then they'll find it already pointed at them." That night, Selim lit a lantern in the highest tower. It was a quiet symbol. Small. A single light atop the empire. Not a war drum. Not a call to blood. A reminder. The empire had almost fallen into its own shadow. But the blade had not lost its hand, and the Sultan still watched the dark. Days passed. Then weeks. The city exhaled slowly, like a man waking from fever. The markets resumed their rhythm. Traders once again hawked spices and cloth with their usual flair. Shipments flowed through the Golden Horn. Children chased cats through alleyways, and the call to prayer echoed from mosques with renewed steadiness. But beneath it all, the empire was different. The fear hadn't vanished, it had evolved. Now, people did not fear chaos. They feared order. Selim's order. Inside the palace, the court had changed too. The Grand Vizier, who had survived 3 sultans before, retired suddenly and without ceremony. A quiet woman from the observatory's archive was promoted in his place. Her first act? Disbanding the old chain of command ledgers and replacing them with live ledgers run by scribes loyal only to the lighthouse. The empire's pulse was no longer measured in royal decrees. It was measured in action. Unannounced inspections of provincial courts began. Taxes collected by the Sultan's agents were rerouted to local investments. Wells, grain storage, schools, funded and monitored without noble interference. Corruption still existed. But now it bled, quickly and quietly. Selim changed too. He no longer held audiences in the throne room. He met people in their own spaces, guard barracks, guild halls, back courtyards of provincial mosques. When he spoke, he used no flourish, no preamble. Only this. What is broken? What do you need? How will you prove it matters? He signed fewer executions, gave more pardons. But when he did sign a death, it came without warning and was carried out before the sun had set. The city learned, mercy was offered only once, and vengeance had no voice. He kept the dagger close, always at his waist. He had not drawn it since the night the echoes fell, but its presence was felt. Everyone knew the crescent dagger still gleamed. Even Layla. They stood one morning at the upper tower, watching ships sail under the Bosphorus Bridge, a new construction financed entirely by trade taxes that would have once lined a pasha's purse. "You've done it," Layla said. "No war. No rebellion. And the court follows you like gravity." Selim didn't look at her. He was watching a barge move slow and steady across the current. "I haven't done it yet." She raised an eyebrow. "What's left?" "Legacy," he murmured. "What I leave behind when I vanish." She stepped beside him. "You still don't believe it's finished?" "I don't believe in peace," Selim said softly. "I believe in preparation." He turned to her, eyes tired but clear. "You know why the second dagger formed? It wasn't because I was cruel or unjust. It was because I didn't speak." Layla nodded. They filled the silence with their own voice. "Exactly," he said. "An empire can survive enemies. It cannot survive misunderstanding." That night, Selim did something no sultan had done in living memory. He opened the palace gates. Not symbolically. Literally. Commoners, merchants, travelers, scholars, anyone with a complaint, a vision, a warning, was allowed to speak before the council every third day at dusk. The court resisted. He silenced them with a sentence. "You may rule with your tongues. I will rule with my ears." Soon, the observatory was filled with voices. Some begged for help. Some warned of corruption. Others challenged policy outright, arguing tariffs, land laws, education systems. Selim listened. He did not always agree, but he always answered. The people began to speak of him in a different way now. Not as a blade, not as a shadow, but as something new. A sultan who hears. A ruler of fire and ink. But the shadow never fully left. One rainy evening, as the palace wind howled through the marble corridors, Selim found a letter tucked into the folds of his robes. It had not been placed by guards or pages. It was simply there. No seal. No signature. Only a line. "When the next dagger rises, will they carry your silence or your voice?" Selim stood by the window for a long time. Outside, the sky cracked with lightning. And deep in the palace vault, he placed his dagger into a silk-lined box. He locked it, and wrote a decree the next morning. From this day forward, the crescent dagger shall not be drawn in judgment by any sultan. Let words decide law. Let proof decide guilt. Let blood be the last answer, not the first. The court was stunned, but they obeyed. And the box was placed in the Hall of Reflections, sealed with wax and prayer. Years passed. Selim aged. His beard turned silver. His hands stiffened in winter. Layla never left his side. The observatory grew into a university. The Eidolon became the record keepers, not executioners. The lighthouse expanded to every province, training governors and judges alike. Children grew up hearing his name in parables. The Sultan who silenced the daggers. And long after his voice had faded, his silence spoke, and no blade ever rose again in its name.